Hi Year 10. Today we are going to be comparing the themes to both Blake's London and Dharker's living space that we have studied since our remote work began. Again, as always, we will spend the first bit of the lesson recalling some key vocabulary and recalling some key prior knowledge that we'll need for today's lesson. So our first word we're recalling is a theme. What is a theme in a text? And then I would like you to consider what the themes may be of London. Last lesson, we studied the word miraculous. What can you remember about the word miraculous? Look back at your notes from last lesson to help you if you need it. And how could you view the slums, the existence of the slums, as miraculous? So pause the video and have a go at answering those two questions now. Now, our new word today is confine, or this idea of confinement. Now, to confine something is to keep or restrict someone or something within certain limits of space, scope, or time. So you could be confined in terms of space. So a confined space may be a prison or a very small room. It's restricting your movements. You may be confined in your life circumstances. For example, people who are in poverty in the novels that we are reading may be confined because they don't have very many options. Their poverty leaves them very little choice in life. Or you could be confined due to time. You might only have a very confined period of time in order to complete a task. But in terms of the context within living space in London, we're going to be looking at this idea of people being confined by their lack of freedom or their personal circumstances and their poverty. So pause the video and quickly jot that definition or a definition in your own words down. So once you've done that, I'd like you to consider the following question. How does Blake present the people of London as confined? And you can pause the video and answer that question. So a theme then. A theme is a main idea that the writer is wanting us to consider. So, for example, in an Inspector Calls, when we studied that at the start of the year, a central theme there would be social class or responsibility. These are big ideas the writer wants us to think about. So what are the themes of London then? We have themes of poverty. We have themes of restriction. We have themes of exploitation of people, of the poor, particularly of children. So we have predominantly some very negative themes in London, such as death as well. So miraculous, if something is miraculous, then a miracle has happened, something that is positive but very unlikely or unusual to have happened. So how could we view the slums as miraculous then? Well, on one level, they're miraculous because they haven't fallen down and injured anybody. But another way, and remember, from our work yesterday on living space, what Dharker does is she builds up this Western perspective, judgmental perspective, even if we don't mean it negatively. And through that word miraculous, which is a turning point in the poem, she's making us actually think the existence of these people and their strength and their courage, their bravery and their faith and their hope. That is miraculous. And that is something that actually we as Westerners should admire, you know, how ingenious and innovative they are to live in the way they do successfully. So these are all things that we should admire as opposed to pity. So Blake presents the people of London as confined by their poverty. They are confined because of the restrictions and rules and laws of the church, the government and the monarchy. And remember, William Blake wanted people, the working everyday people of Britain, to rise up French Revolution style and to overthrow the establishment, essentially. So today we're going to be comparing the themes of London and living space. So you can pause the video and quickly jot down your knowledge goal. By the end of this lesson, you will know how the themes of London are presented through the poet's use of language, how the themes of living space are presented through the poet's use of language, and the comparisons between how these themes are presented in the different poems. Now, we know from our previous work that we have done on the anthology poetry this year that in the exam you will have to write about one poem by itself. So think about the mini assessment you did on London a few lessons ago, where you have 20 minutes to write about a single poem. Then we know you will be asked to compare that poem to one other from the anthology with the same theme. Now, London and Living Space are brilliant poems to compare because they are both focusing on this idea of a place. And whilst both of these places are places involved in poverty, we actually have quite a lot of differences in this idea of the positivity or the negativity in the poem and the way they present those places. So we're going to be exploring how things are both similar and different today. You will be very pleased to know you will not be writing any comparative mini PEs at this stage. So what I'd like you to do is just have a look at what these two poems look like. Don't worry about the words. What differences or similarities do you notice? So just pause the video and have a look. Think about really how the structure of these poems is quite different. What obvious difference do you identify, and what could be the effect of the structure in both these poems? What can you remember through our annotation about why these writers have made these structural choices to make their poems look the way they do? So pause the video and just have a quick 30 seconds to 1 minute think about that and make some notes if you choose. So we can see very obviously that in Living Space, it is a lot less organised. Now, in this version, we can see that actually what they haven't done is separate the three stanzas. We know from our annotation that into this rough frame, someone has squeezed the living place is in its own little mini stanza. We spoke yesterday about how Dharker uses mimesis to mimic the uneven structures of the slums and the instability and potential danger that exists. The fact that we have the line, the whole structure leans dangerously, is leaning dangerously over the side of the poem. So that's why we have this mimesis, this mimicking of the structure, mimicking something about the poem. We also as well have this idea of a squeezed living space reflected in the structure of this squeezed stanza. But it is a lot less orderly, a lot more chaotic, which again could reflect how their lives in the slums are a lot less orderly than potentially our lives in the West. London, however, is very, very different. We can see it is much neater in its visual form and structure. We can see that it has 4 stanzas of 4 lines, and we know it has this very strict A-B rhyming scheme as well as a very distinctive rhythm. Now, we could interpret this as William Blake wanting to show the restriction and the monotony and this sort of cyclical nature of existence, this cycle of poverty no one can break out of, and this cycle of restriction and lack of freedom that no one has the courage to break out of either. And this is very evident in his form and structure. So if you were going to write a full essay on this, writing about the form and structure and writing about those differences in the form and structure could be something that you are going to do. So what I'm going to ask you to do is complete 2 tables. Now, on the Teams assignment, you should have both these tables uploaded as a Word document. You have 2 choices. You can either draw the 2 tables, the one on this slide and then the one I'll show you in a moment, out on paper to fill them in. You may choose to use the Word document attached to the assignment, and you should, if I've clicked the right button, be able to actually type onto it and edit it and then submit it that way. So it's completely up to you as to whether you want to do it on the computer or draw it out. But what I would like you to do is firstly for London and then for living space, I would like you to identify a quotation from the poem that reflects each of these three themes. So we have this idea of freedom and confinement. So obviously we have these two things juxtaposed here. They're two contrasting ideas because we know that confinement is about being restricted. So what I've done here as an example for you is I've picked mind-forged manacles because I believe that shows confinement, and I have briefly analysed here or made some notes. How does that quotation show, in this case, confinement? Then I would pick a quotation out that shows the theme of death with a brief analysis, and then a quotation that shows innocence or suffering and a brief analysis. Then you just need to go and do exactly the same thing for living space. So evidence to show either freedom or confinement and a brief analysis, evidence that shows this idea of potential death and some analysis, and then again, evidence that shows potentially either innocence or suffering and some analysis. Now, the purpose of this is to get you to think about how both poems present these themes and do they present them in a similar or a different way. So please copy out those tables now or pause the video and move over to complete that work on the Word document or on your paper. So finally, what I would like you to do is once you have completed both those tables, you should have some evidence to show whether both poems present these themes within them, which it should be evident by now that they do. But do they present these themes in a similar or a different way? For example, in London, it is purely based on confinement. Any idea of freedom appears to be outside of the reach and grasp of the people unless they choose to rise up against the establishment. However, in living space, we have this sort of sense of confinement in that they are confined into this existence, forced to rely on their bravery and their ingenuity to carve out a living space and a life for themselves. However, you could also argue that there is freedom within that. And living space is most certainly a more hopeful and a more positive poem by the end. These people appear to have more freedom in the way they can live their lives than the way Blake would present the people of London. So look at your tables. Can you find evidence of some of the themes from one poem being presented in the other? So have you been able to find evidence for each theme for both poems? Are the themes and ideas presented mainly similarly or differently? In what way? So have you found that the presentation of some themes are similar or some themes are different, or are they either all similar or all different? And the final question is just you developing your own personal opinion here. Do you find one poem a more successful or engaging poem in the way it presents the themes, and why? You may feel that they are equally successful in their presentation of the themes. You may feel that one is more successful than the other. So pause the video, please, and just make some notes based on those three questions. Finally then, I would like you to write a brief summary. How do both poems show the theme of confinement? And this might just simply be a sentence for each poem, identifying whether they show the theme of confinement in a similar or a different way. So that's the end of our lesson then. As always, if you have any questions or concerns, do please email your class teacher.